The scream that tore from Penelope Vaughn's throat died behind her father's hand as she watched Marcus Thornhill whip his stable boy until the young man's back ran red with blood. And in that moment, she knew her wedding tomorrow would be the death of everything good inside her. "Hush now, Penny," her father whispered harshly, pulling her back from the window of the Thornhill estate. "You must not anger him before the vows are spoken." It was June of 1883 in Valentine, Nebraska, a town that had sprung up along the Niobrara River, where cattle ranchers and farmers tried to carve civilization from the prairie. Penelope's father, George Vaughn, owned the general store that served as the heart of commerce for miles around. At 20 years old, Penelope had believed she would have some say in her future, but her father's gambling debts had decided otherwise. Marcus Thornhill owned half the county, ran the largest cattle operation in 3 states, and collected what he was owed with ruthless efficiency. When George could not pay, Marcus had made his terms clear. He wanted Penelope, with her honey-colored hair and green eyes, to be his wife and give him legitimate heirs to his empire. "Papa, please," Penelope whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He is a monster. Did you see what he just did to that poor boy? Over a saddle that was not polished to his liking." George's weathered face crumpled with shame, but he would not meet her eyes. "We have no choice, daughter. He will ruin us. We will lose everything. Your mother's medical bills, they have buried us." "This is the only way." Penelope pulled away from her father and straightened her spine. "The only way for you, perhaps, but I am the one who will have to live with that man, who will have to bear his children and endure his cruelty." "Do not be dramatic," George said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Many marriages start without love. Perhaps you will find contentment." Contentment. The word tasted like ash. Penelope had seen Marcus Thornhill strike a saloon girl who had spilled whiskey on his coat. She had heard stories from the ranch hands who drank at the saloon, speaking in low voices about his temper, his demands, the way he treated those who depended on him like property to be used and discarded. At 42 years old, he had buried 2 wives already. The first had died in childbirth along with the baby. The second had fallen down the stairs, or so the official story went, though the doctor who had examined her body left town shortly after and never returned. That night, Penelope lay in her narrow bed in the rooms above the general store and stared at the ceiling. Her mother slept in the next room, lost in the fog of laudanum that kept the pain of her wasting sickness at bay. Penelope had already said her goodbyes, knowing her mother would not understand them. Tomorrow, she would put on the white dress that hung like a ghost in her wardrobe, and she would walk to the church, and she would speak vows that would chain her to Marcus Thornhill until death parted them. And given his history, that death would likely be hers. She must have finally drifted into an uneasy sleep because the sound of pebbles against her window jolted her awake. The moon hung full and bright outside, casting silver light across her room. More pebbles rattled against the glass. Penelope rose and crossed to the window, her heart hammering. Below, in the alley behind the store, stood a man on horseback. He was silhouetted against the moonlight, his hat tipped low, but something about the set of his shoulders made her breath catch. She recognized him. Jackson Irwin, one of the ranch hands from the Thornhill spread. She had seen him in town several times over the past months, always polite, always with kind eyes the color of storm clouds. He had helped her once when her arms were full of packages, had tipped his hat and smiled at her with a warmth that made her chest ache, because she knew such simple kindnesses would soon be memories from a lost world. Penelope opened the window carefully, mindful of the squeak in the frame. "What are you doing here?" she whispered down to him. "Getting you out," Jackson said, his voice low and urgent. "If you want to go, I have a horse, I have supplies, I have a plan, but we have to leave now tonight before dawn." "I do not understand," Penelope said, though her heart had already begun to race with something that felt dangerously like hope. "Why would you do this? If Marcus finds out you helped me, he will kill you." "I know what he will do," Jackson said. "I have worked for him for 3 years, Miss Vaughn. I have seen things that kept me awake at night. When I heard you were to marry him, I knew I could not stand by and let it happen, not if there was any chance you wanted another choice." "You do not even know me," Penelope whispered. "I know enough," Jackson said. "I know you bring food to the widow Henderson even though she has nothing to pay with. I know you read to the children at the schoolhouse on Sundays. I know you have a good heart, and Marcus Thornhill will break it just to watch it shatter. So I am offering you a choice, Miss Vaughn. You can stay and marry him tomorrow, or you can climb out that window right now, and I will take you anywhere you want to go." Penelope's mind raced. This was madness. Jackson was risking his life. She would be ruining her father, bringing Marcus's wrath down on her family. But as she stood there in her nightgown with the cool night air on her face, she thought of the stable boys screaming, of Marcus's cold eyes, of the 2 dead wives buried in the cemetery on the hill. "My mother," she said. "My father cannot afford her medicine without Marcus's money." "I have been saving my wages for 2 years," Jackson said. "It is not a fortune, but it is enough to see your mother cared for a while longer. I will leave it with the doctor before we go, with instructions. Your father will have to find another way, but at least you will have bought him time." It was not perfect. It was not a clean solution. But it was better than the alternative, better than the slow death of her soul that awaited her at the Thornhill Ranch. "Give me 5 minutes," Penelope said, "and do not leave without me." She saw Jackson smile even in the moonlight. "I would wait until sunrise if needed, Miss Vaughn, but 5 minutes would be better." Penelope dressed quickly in her simplest traveling dress, dark blue calico that would not show the dust of the road. She stuffed a few belongings into a carpet bag, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the buttons and ties. She took her mother's silver locket from the dresser, the one with the tiny portraits of her parents on their wedding day when they had still loved each other. She took the small bundle of letters from her childhood friend who had moved to California. She took nothing that would weigh her down. At the last moment, she crossed to her mother's room. The older woman slept fitfully, her breathing labored. Penelope kissed her forehead gently. "I am sorry, Mama," she whispered. "I hope you can forgive me, but I cannot marry him, I cannot." Her mother did not wake. Penelope told herself that was a mercy. She wrote a brief note to her father, explaining that she had left of her own free will, that no one had forced her, that she could not go through with the wedding. She did not mention Jackson. Let her father think she had run away alone if it would protect the young cowboy who was risking everything for her. Then she climbed out the window, her carpet bag clutched in one hand, her skirts bunched in the other. Jackson reached up and helped her down, his hands strong and steady. Up close, she could see the concern in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He was afraid too, she realized, but he was doing this anyway. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Well enough," Penelope said. "You will ride with me tonight," Jackson said. "I have another horse, but she is waiting with our supplies outside of town. I could not risk leading 2 horses through the streets." He helped her up into the saddle, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist, holding her steady, and Penelope felt the warmth of him at her back. It should have been improper, scandalous, but all she felt was safe. They rode through the quiet streets of Valentine at a careful walk, Jackson guiding his horse through the shadows, avoiding the main roads. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and Penelope's heart nearly stopped, but no lights came on in the houses they passed. The whole town slept, unaware that the morning would bring chaos when Marcus Thornhill arrived at the church to find his bride had vanished. Once they cleared the town limits, Jackson urged his horse into a canter. They followed the Niobrara River west, the water gleaming like mercury in the moonlight. The prairie stretched endless around them, grass whispering secrets to the wind. Penelope had lived in Valentine her whole life, had never traveled more than a day's ride from home, and now she was fleeing into the vast unknown with a man she barely knew. After an hour of hard riding, Jackson slowed and turned his horse toward a copse of cottonwood trees near the river. There, as he had promised, another horse waited, tied to a low branch. Supplies were packed neatly in saddlebags, a bedroll strapped behind the saddle. "This is Willow," Jackson said, helping Penelope down. "She has a sweet temperament and she will carry you without complaint. I have food for 3 days if we are careful, and I know places we can stop for more." Penelope looked at the preparations, the thought and care that had gone into this escape. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. Jackson ducked his head, suddenly shy. "Since the engagement was announced 6 weeks ago. I told myself I was being foolish, that you would never agree to come with me, that I had no right to interfere. But I could not shake the feeling that I had to try, that I would regret it the rest of my life if I did not at least offer you a choice." "You could have died for offering me this choice," Penelope said softly. "Marcus Thornhill does not forgive what he considers betrayal." "I know," Jackson said, "but some things are worth the risk, Miss Vaughn. If we are fleeing into the wilderness together, perhaps you should call me Penelope," she said. "Or Penny, as my friends do." Jackson smiled, and it transformed his whole face. He was handsome in a quiet way, she realized, with sun-weathered skin and laugh lines around his eyes despite the serious set of his mouth. He was perhaps 24 or 25, she guessed, old enough to have worked several years as a ranch hand, but young enough that his optimism had not been entirely beaten out of him by the hardness of frontier life. "Then you should call me Jackson," he said. "Or Jack, if you prefer." "Jackson suits you," Penelope said. She did not know why, but it did. It was a strong name, honest and straightforward. They mounted their separate horses and rode on through the night. Jackson set a steady pace, not pushing the animals too hard but keeping them moving. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, following landmarks that Penelope could not distinguish in the darkness. The moon wheeled overhead, beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "Where are we going?" Penelope finally asked as they paused to water the horses at a creek. "Colorado," Jackson said. "I have a cousin in Denver who runs a freight company. He has offered me work before. We can get lost in a city that size, start fresh. It is a long ride, but if we can make it there, we will be beyond Marcus Thornhill's reach." "He will come after us," Penelope said. It was not a question. "He will try," Jackson agreed. "But we have a head start, and I know the land between here and there. I have driven cattle along these routes. I know where we can find water, where we can rest the horses, where we can avoid the main roads. If we are smart and careful, we can stay ahead of him." Penelope nodded, trying to absorb the enormity of what she had done. In a few hours, the sun would rise on what should have been her wedding day. Her father would find her note. Marcus would be informed, and then the fury would begin. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I have brought trouble to you." Jackson looked at her across the darkness, his expression serious. "Penelope, I offered this knowing full well what it would cost. You did not force me. I chose this, same as you did, and I would make the same choice again." "Why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "You said you do not know me. Why would you risk so much for a stranger?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. Do you remember last winter when old Tom Hendricks died and left his wife without any means? You organized the whole town to make sure she had firewood and food through the cold months. You did not just give charity. You made sure she kept her dignity. Anyone would have done the same, Penelope protested. But they did not, Jackson said. You did. And I remember the day I helped you with those packages. You asked me about my day, about how I was doing. Not because you wanted something, but because you actually cared to know the answer. In Marcus Thornhill's employ, you stopped being a person to him. You are just a tool, and when you are no longer useful, you are discarded. You looked at me like I was a human being. That is rarer than you might think. Penelope felt her throat tighten with emotion. That should not be rare, she whispered. No, Jackson agreed. It should not be, but it is. And when I saw that Marcus intended to marry you, I knew what would happen. I have seen what he does to things he owns. I could not let that happen to you, not if there was any chance of preventing it. They rode on as the eastern sky began to lighten from black to deep blue. Jackson pushed them harder now, clearly wanting to put as much distance as possible between them and Valentine before the alarm was raised. Penelope's legs ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she bit her lip and did not complain. Jackson was doing this for her. The least she could do was keep up. The sun rose in a blaze of gold and pink, spilling light across the endless prairie. Penelope had seen countless sunrises, but this one felt different, tasted different. It was the first sunrise of her new life, her free life. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would be hers to face, not dictated by a cruel man who saw her as property. They stopped in the late morning to rest the horses and eat a brief meal of jerky and hard biscuits from Jackson's supplies. Penelope forced herself to eat even though her stomach was knotted with anxiety. She needed to keep her strength up. How long until he realizes I am gone? She asked. Jackson calculated. The wedding was set for 10 in the morning. Your father will have found your note by now, probably around dawn when he woke. It will take time for the news to reach Marcus, for him to organize a search party. Figure they will not ride out until noon at the earliest, maybe later if there is confusion about which direction you went. We have maybe a 12-hour head start, and we have been riding hard. A search party will waste time checking the wrong directions first. I would guess we have until tomorrow afternoon before we need to seriously worry about them catching up. And after that? Penelope asked. After that, we start being very clever about our route, Jackson said. We will use streams to hide our tracks, double back when we can, make it hard for them to follow. It will slow us down, but it will slow them down more. Penelope watched him, marveling at how calm he was, how thorough his planning had been. You have thought of everything, she said. I tried to, Jackson said. I could not bear the thought of getting you into this and then failing you. Something in his voice made Penelope look at him more closely. There was more here than simple compassion for a stranger in trouble. She could see it in the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, in the careful way he helped her onto her horse, in the fierce protectiveness in his eyes when he spoke of Marcus. Jackson, she said softly, is there something you are not telling me? He met her gaze, and she saw the truth there before he spoke it. I have admired you for a long time, Penelope. Since the first day I saw you, actually. You were in the general store, and you were being patient with a child who could not make up his mind about penny candy. You were not annoyed or dismissive. You were kind. And I thought, there is someone who understands that kindness costs nothing and means everything. Penelope's heart began to beat faster. You did this because you have feelings for me. I did this because you deserved a choice, Jackson corrected gently. My feelings are my own to manage. I am not asking anything of you, Penelope. If you want when we get to Denver, I will help you get settled and then I will leave you be. You will owe me nothing. This is about your freedom, not about my hopes." Penelope stared at him, at this man who had risked everything for her without demanding anything in return. It was so foreign to everything she had experienced with Marcus, who had treated her engagement like a business transaction, who had informed her of their wedding date rather than asking her opinion, who had looked at her like she was a prize mare he was acquiring for his stable. "What if I do not want you to leave me be?" she heard herself say. Jackson went very still. "Penelope." "I am not saying I am in love with you," she said quickly. "I barely know you, but I would like to know you. I would like the chance to find out if this feeling I get when you look at me might grow into something more. Is that terribly forward of me?" Jackson's face broke into a wide smile, and Penelope saw joy there, pure and unguarded. "It is not forward, it is honest. And I would like nothing more than the chance to court you properly, Penelope Vaughn, even if we have to do it while fleeing across half the frontier." Despite everything, despite the danger and the fear and the unknown road ahead, Penelope laughed. It bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, relief and terror and exhilaration all mixed together. They rode through the afternoon, and Jackson taught her things about reading the land, about following game trails and finding water. He pointed out a hawk circling overhead, explained how the animals behaved before a storm. He told her stories about his childhood in Missouri, about coming west after his parents died of cholera, about learning to work cattle and survive on the frontier. In turn, Penelope told him about her life in Valentine, about her mother's illness and her father's slow collapse into gambling and debt. She told him about the books she loved to read, the stories of adventure and far-off places that she had devoured in the quiet hours of the general store. She told him about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday, of traveling to places where people built cities of marble and glass. "Maybe someday we will," Jackson said. "See the ocean, I mean, after things settle down, after we make a life in Denver." The casual assumption of a shared future should have frightened Penelope, but instead it warmed her. For the first time in months, she had something to look forward to instead of dread. They made camp that night in a sheltered draw where a grove of trees would hide their fire. Jackson was careful to keep the flames small, using dry wood that produced minimal smoke. He taught Penelope how to hobble the horses so they could graze but not wander, how to arrange a bedroll for maximum comfort on the hard ground. "You should sleep," he said after they had eaten a sparse meal. "I will keep watch for a few hours, then wake you to take a turn." "You need sleep too," Penelope protested. "I will get some," Jackson promised, "but not until I am sure we are safe for the night." Penelope settled into her bedroll, acutely aware that she was sleeping in the open air with a man who was not her husband or her kin. It should have felt scandalous, dangerous. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months. She could see Jackson sitting by the dying fire, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness. He was watching over her, protecting her. She woke sometime in the deep night to find Jackson gently shaking her shoulder. "Your turn," he whispered. "Wake me if you see or hear anything that does not feel right. Trust your instincts." Penelope took his place by the fire, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the chill. The prairie night was alive with sounds: insects chirping, the distant yip of coyotes, the whisper of wind through grass. Above, the stars spread across the sky in a glittering carpet, so many and so bright that Penelope felt dizzy looking up at them. She thought about Marcus waking this morning to discover she was gone. She thought about his rage, cold and calculated and terrifying. She thought about her father and felt a pang of guilt quickly followed by a flash of anger. He had been willing to sell her to save himself. She loved him, but she could not forgive that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She thought about Jackson, sleeping a few feet away, who had given up his life and his safety for her, who asked nothing in return except the chance to know her better. The next day brought harder riding as Jackson began to implement evasive maneuvers. They rode through a shallow stream for several miles, the horses splashing through water that would hide their tracks. They backtracked twice, creating false trails. They avoided any settlements or ranches where word of their passing might spread. By late afternoon, Jackson's expression had grown tense. He kept looking back over his shoulder, scanning the horizon behind them. "What is wrong?" Penelope asked. "Probably nothing," Jackson said, but his tone said otherwise. "I thought I saw dust rising about an hour ago. Could be cattle, could be wild horses, could be riders." Penelope's blood ran cold. "Already? You said we had until tomorrow afternoon." "I said at the earliest," Jackson reminded her. "Marcus is not a patient man, and he has resources. He could have had men out looking within hours if he was motivated enough, and losing you would be a blow to his pride. That would motivate him plenty." They pushed the horses harder, and Penelope could feel Willow tiring beneath her. The mare was game and willing, but they had been riding for almost 2 full days with minimal rest. The animals needed to stop, needed to graze and water and recover. As the sun began to set, Jackson led them into a canyon where red rock walls rose on either side. "This is a risk," he said. "If they trap us in here, we will have nowhere to go. But there is a cave about a mile in where we can hide. If we can get there before they see us, they might ride past without knowing we are here." They urged the tired horses deeper into the canyon, following a narrow trail that wound between the rocks. Penelope's heart hammered so loudly she was sure it would give them away. Every shadow looked like a pursuing rider, every sound like approaching hoofbeats. The cave, when they reached it, was little more than an indentation in the cliff face, but it was deep enough to hide them and the horses if they stayed still. Jackson led the animals inside and quickly began rubbing them down, trying to keep them quiet. Penelope helped as best she could, her hands shaking. They had barely finished when they heard it, voices echoing off the canyon walls. The clatter of multiple horses on stone. Jackson put a finger to his lips and drew Penelope back into the deepest part of the cave. The horses, exhausted, stood quietly. Penelope held her breath and prayed. The voices grew louder. She could make out words now. "No tracks in here that I can see." That was a voice she did not recognize. Check it anyway. That voice she knew. Marcus Thornhill, cold and hard as iron. They could not have gotten far. The girl does not know how to ride properly, and Irwin is too soft to push her hard enough. "Maybe they did not come this way at all, boss," another voice suggested. "Maybe they headed north instead of west." "Then we will find that out soon enough," Marcus said. "But we check everything. I want her found. And when we find her, I want Irwin brought to me alive. I have plans for what happens to men who steal from me." The threat in those words made Penelope's blood freeze. She looked at Jackson and saw her own fear reflected in his eyes, but also determination. He pulled his rifle close, and she understood the message. He would not let them take her without a fight. The voices moved past the cave. Penelope counted 3 different speakers besides Marcus, so at least 4 men in the search party, possibly more who had not spoken. The sound of hoofbeats faded gradually into the distance. They waited in the darkness of the cave for what felt like hours. Finally, when full night had fallen and no sound had disturbed the canyon for a long time, Jackson whispered, "We need to move. They will camp somewhere for the night, and we need to put distance between us while they are stationary." "The horses are exhausted," Penelope whispered back. "I know," Jackson said grimly. "But if we stay here until morning, they will find us. We go slow, we walk the horses as much as we ride them, but we keep moving. They led the horses out of the cave and back down the canyon trail, moving as quietly as possible. Every small sound seemed magnified in the darkness. A pebble rolling beneath a hoof sounded like an avalanche. The creak of saddle leather sounded like a scream. They emerged from the canyon and turned north instead of continuing west. Misdirection, Jackson explained quietly. Let them think we stayed on the westward route. We will circle back around when we can. That night was the hardest of Penelope's life. They walked more than they rode, leading the stumbling horses through darkness broken only by starlight. Penelope's feet blistered in her boots. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. But every time she thought about stopping, she remembered Marcus's voice, cold and promising violence, and she found the strength to take another step. Dawn found them sheltering in a small grove of trees near a creek. The horses drank deeply and began to graze. Jackson and Penelope collapsed on the ground, too tired to even set up proper beds. "We cannot keep this pace," Penelope said, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "I know," Jackson said. "We need help. We need fresh horses. We need to get off the open prairie where we can be spotted from miles away." "Where can we get any of that?" Penelope asked. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. "There is a place about a day's ride north of here, a settlement called Rosebud, just over the South Dakota border. I know a man there, a blacksmith named Thomas, who used to work for one of the ranches. He is a good man, and he has no love for Marcus Thornhill. Marcus cheated him out of wages years ago. If we can get to Thomas, he might help us." "That is a lot of ifs and mights," Penelope said. "It is all we have," Jackson replied. They slept in shifts through the morning, then pushed on in the early afternoon. The horses were moving better after the rest and feed, but they were still tired. Jackson kept them to an easy pace, saving their strength. As the sun began its descent, Jackson suddenly reined in his horse. He was staring at something in the distance, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" Penelope asked. "Riders," Jackson said, "coming from the east, moving fast." Penelope's heart sank. "Marcus, maybe, or maybe just travelers, but we cannot take the chance." He looked around, assessing the landscape. They were in open country with little cover. "There," he said, pointing to a small rise in the ground about a quarter-mile away. "If we can get over that ridge, there is a dry wash on the other side if I remember correctly. We can hide there." They urged the horses into a canter, racing toward the ridge. Penelope glanced back and saw the dust cloud of the approaching riders growing larger. They were closing the distance fast. They crested the ridge, and Jackson gave a sharp exhale of relief. The dry wash was there, just as he remembered, a deep channel cut by long-ago floods. They rode down into it and dismounted, holding the horses' heads to keep them quiet. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped somewhere above them. Penelope heard voices, but could not make out the words. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure it would burst from her chest. Then a new sound. A single horse coming down into the wash. Penelope looked at Jackson in terror, but he had his rifle ready, his face set and determined. A rider appeared around the bend in the wash. Not Marcus, Penelope saw with a flood of relief, but not anyone she recognized either. A man about Jackson's age, dressed in trail-worn clothes with a cautious expression. "Easy," the man said, holding up his hands as Jackson leveled the rifle at him. "I am not here to hurt you. Who are you?" Jackson demanded. "Name is Cole Patterson," the man said. "My friends and I saw you running and figured you might be in some kind of trouble. We also saw the group of men asking questions in the last settlement we passed through. Hard-looking men, offering money for information about a young woman and her companion. Figured those men and your trouble might be connected." "Why would you care?" Jackson asked, not lowering the rifle. Cole shrugged. Let us just say I have my own reasons for not liking men who hunt women. My sister ran away from a bad situation a few years back. I helped her. I figure maybe I can help you too if you need it. Jackson studied him for a long moment, then slowly lowered the rifle. We need fresh horses and a way to reach Rosebud without being seen. Can you provide either of those things? Maybe, Cole said. I have 2 friends up above. We have extra horses and we know these lands well. We can get you to Rosebud, but it will cost you. We do not have much money, Penelope said. Cole looked at her and she saw sympathy in his eyes. I am not talking about money, miss. I am talking about you giving me your word that you are not wanted for any real crime, that you are not a thief or a murderer on the run. I will not help criminals, but I will help someone fleeing a forced marriage or the like. I am not a criminal, Penelope said, lifting her chin. I am running from a marriage to a cruel man. This is Jackson. He is helping me reach safety. Cole nodded. That is good enough for me. Come on up and meet my friends. We will work out a plan. Cole's companions were a woman named Sarah, who dressed like a man and rode like she was part of the horse, and an older man named Horace, who had the weathered look of someone who had spent his entire life on the frontier. They listened to Jackson explain the situation without interrupting. Marcus Thornhill, Sarah said when Jackson finished. I have heard of him. Mean as a snake and twice as patient when he is on the hunt. You are going to need to be smarter than him to get away. We have been trying, Jackson said. Trying and succeeding are different things, Horace observed. They are close behind you and you are riding tired horses. You will not make it to Rosebud before they catch you at this rate. That is why we need help, Penelope said. Sarah exchanged glances with her companions, and some unspoken communication passed between them. All right, she said. Here is what we are going to do. Horace and I will take your horses and lead Thornhill's men on a chase south. We will leave an obvious trail, make it look like you are trying to reach the Kansas border. While they are chasing us, you 2 will take our extra horses and ride with Cole to Rosebud. By the time Thornhill figures out the trick, you will have a good lead. That puts you in danger, Jackson protested. We can handle it, Sarah said with a grin. Horace and I have been outrunning trouble for years. Besides, we have fast horses and we know 100 places to disappear in this country. They will not catch us. Why would you do this for strangers? Penelope asked. Sarah's smile faded and her expression grew serious. Because I was you once, running from a man who thought he owned me. Someone helped me then. I am just passing it along. They made the switch quickly, transferring the saddlebags to the fresh horses. Penelope hugged Sarah impulsively. Thank you, she whispered. I will never forget this. Just be happy, Sarah said. That is thanks enough. Horace and Sarah rode off to the south, leading Jackson's and Penelope's tired horses, deliberately making no effort to hide their tracks. Cole led Jackson and Penelope north, taking a route that followed stream beds and rocky ground where their passage would leave minimal sign. We will ride through the night, Cole said. It is not ideal, but time is more valuable than rest right now. I know an old trapper's cabin about halfway to Rosebud where we can hole up for a few hours tomorrow, let the horses rest. After that, it is a straight shot to town. The night ride was grueling. The fresh horses were strong and willing, but the darkness made every step treacherous. More than once, Penelope nearly dozed off in the saddle, catching herself at the last moment. Jackson looked equally exhausted, his face gray in the moonlight. But Cole kept them moving, navigating by stars and instinct, leading them through terrain that seemed impassable in the dark. As dawn broke, they entered a wooded area that felt like sanctuary after days on the open prairie. The trapper's cabin was more of a shack, really, half fallen down and clearly abandoned for years. But it had a roof and walls, and to Penelope it looked like a palace. They tended to the horses first, making sure the animals had water and feed, then collapsed inside the cabin. "Sleep," Cole said. "I will keep watch. You are safe here for now." Penelope wanted to protest, but her body had other ideas. She fell asleep almost before her head touched the bedroll Jackson spread for her. She woke to afternoon sun slanting through gaps in the cabin walls and the smell of something cooking. Jackson was crouched over a small fire Cole had built in the old fireplace, heating beans from a can. "You let me sleep too long," Penelope said, sitting up and wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "You needed it," Jackson said. "We all did. Cole kept watch while we rested." Cole came in from tending the horses. "We should move out in about an hour," he said. "We can reach Rosebud before dark if we leave soon. Once we are there, you will be in a more populated area. Harder for Thornhill to just grab you without witnesses." They ate the beans and some hardtack, a feast compared to the meager meals of the past few days. Penelope felt strength returning to her limbs, hope returning to her heart. They were going to make it. They were actually going to make it. The ride to Rosebud was almost pleasant compared to the desperate flight of the past days. The landscape grew more settled as they approached the town, with farms and small ranches dotting the land. They saw other travelers on the road, families in wagons, cowboys driving small herds of cattle. Rosebud itself was larger than Valentine, a proper frontier town with a main street, several saloons, a hotel, and various shops and businesses. Cole led them to a blacksmith shop on the edge of town, where the ring of hammer on anvil echoed in the late afternoon air. The blacksmith, Thomas, was a bear of a man with arms like tree trunks and a face that had been handsome before a horse kicked it, but his smile was warm when he saw Jackson. "Jackson Irwin," he rumbled. "I heard you were working for Marcus Thornhill. Did not think I would see you again, figured that man would work you to death." "I quit," Jackson said simply. "And I brought someone who needs help. This is Penelope Vaughn." Thomas's expression grew serious as Jackson explained the situation. When Jackson finished, Thomas was quiet for a long moment, then he spit on the ground. "Marcus Thornhill is a disease," he said flatly. "I will help however I can. You need a place to stay, I have a room above the shop. You need horses, I know where to buy them cheap. You need work. I can always use another hand, and I am guessing the lady can find employment in town if she has a mind to." "We are not staying," Jackson said. "We are heading to Denver to my cousin, but we need a few days' rest and a chance to make sure we are not being followed before we move on." "Then you will stay here," Thomas said firmly. "And anyone comes asking questions, I have not seen you. I owe Marcus Thornhill nothing but contempt." Cole left them there, refusing payment, asking only that they remember to help someone else when they had the chance. Penelope hugged him goodbye, grateful for the kindness of strangers. The room above the blacksmith shop was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds and a window overlooking the street. Thomas's wife, a tiny woman named Helen who barely reached her husband's chest, brought them a hot meal and a basin of water for washing. "You look dead on your feet, both of you," Helen said kindly. "Sleep as long as you need. You are safe here." That night, in a real bed for the first time in days, Penelope felt the tension finally drain from her body. Across the small room, Jackson was already asleep, his breathing deep and even. She watched him in the dim light and felt her heart squeeze with something that might have been affection, or might have been something deeper. This man had given up everything for her. He had risked his life, sacrificed his livelihood, and asked nothing in return except the chance to know her. How many men would do such a thing? How many men would see a woman's humanity before they saw property or possession? She thought of Marcus and felt only relief that she would never have to endure his touch, his cruelty, his cold entitlement. Whatever hardships lay ahead, they were better than the slow death of spirit she had escaped. Over the next 3 days they rested and recovered in Rosebud. Penelope helped Helen with cooking and cleaning, grateful for the chance to be useful. Jackson worked in the blacksmith shop with Thomas, earning a little money for the road ahead. They did not venture into town much, not wanting to draw attention, but in the quiet safety of the shop and the room above it, they talked. They talked about everything. About their childhoods and their dreams, about books they had read and places they hoped to see. Jackson told her about his parents, about the small farm in Missouri where he had grown up, about watching them die within days of each other while the cholera ravaged their community. Penelope told him about her mother before the illness, about the woman who had been full of laughter and music, who had taught Penelope to read and instilled in her a love of learning. And they talked about the future, about Denver and Jackson's cousin, about the possibility of starting a freight company of their own someday if they worked hard and saved, about the kind of life they might build together if they chose to. "I want you to know," Jackson said one evening as they sat on the steps outside the shop, watching the sun set, "that I meant what I said before. When we get to Denver, if you want to go your own way, I will not stop you. I will help you get settled, find respectable work, maybe a boarding house with other women. You are not obligated to me because I helped you escape." Penelope was quiet for a long moment. "What if I do not want to go my own way?" she asked softly. Jackson looked at her, hope and fear warring in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that these past days, running and hiding and fearing for our lives, have also been some of the best days I have known," Penelope said. "Because I was free, yes, but also because I was with you. You make me laugh, Jackson. You make me feel safe. You see me as a person, not as property or a burden or a means to an end. Do you know how rare that is, Penelope?" Jackson breathed her name like a prayer. "I am not saying I am ready to marry you tomorrow," Penelope continued, wanting to be honest. "I have spent too long being told who I am and what I will do. I need time to figure out who I am when I get to choose, but I would like to figure that out with you by my side. If that is something you want to." Jackson took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "That is something I want more than anything in this world," he said. "We will take all the time you need. We will do this right, the way you deserve." On the 4th day, Thomas came to them with news. "Word in town is that Marcus Thornhill and his men were spotted 3 days south of here, chasing shadows. Seems someone led them on quite a chase before disappearing. I am guessing that was your friends." Jackson and Penelope exchanged relieved glances. Sarah and Horace had done their job well. "Does that mean it is safe for us to leave?" Penelope asked. "Safe as it is likely to get," Thomas said. "You should go soon, before Thornhill realizes he has been tricked and starts searching in a new direction. I have 2 good horses for you, already saddled and provisioned. And I am not taking payment," he added, holding up a hand to forestall Jackson's protest. "Consider it my contribution to making Marcus Thornhill's life a little harder." They left Rosebud at dawn the next morning, slipping out of town before most of the residents were awake. Thomas and Helen stood in the doorway of the blacksmith shop, waving them off. "If you are ever back this way, you have a home here," Thomas called after them. The journey to Denver took 2 weeks of steady riding. They followed main roads now, no longer needing to hide their trail. The farther they got from Nebraska, the safer they felt. They passed through small settlements and growing towns, through prairie and forest, and eventually into the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Jackson's cousin, James, ran a freight company in Denver that transported goods between the city and the mountain mining towns. He was a jovial man in his 30s with a young family, and he welcomed Jackson and Penelope with open arms and few questions. "Any friend of Jackson's is a friend of mine," James declared. "And I can always use good workers. Jackson, you know your way around horses and wagons. You can start running freight for me within the week. Miss Vaughn, my wife Emma, is always looking for help with the children and the household. She can pay a fair wage." Emma was a cheerful woman with a toddler on her hip and another child playing at her feet. "I would be grateful for the help," she said warmly. "And I know several boarding houses in town that are respectable and safe for a young woman." Penelope found a room in a boarding house run by a stern but kind widow named Mrs. Garrett. The room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the bustling street. It was the first space that was entirely hers, that she had chosen for herself. She worked for Emma during the days, helping with the children and the endless tasks of running a household. It was exhausting work, but Penelope loved it. The children were sweet, and Emma treated her as a friend rather than a servant. In the evenings, Jackson would come calling, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Garrett's watchful eye. They would walk through the city streets, marveling at the buildings and the crowds, so different from the wide open spaces of the prairie. They would talk about their days, their hopes, their plans. Slowly, over the weeks and months, Penelope felt herself healing from the trauma of her near marriage to Marcus. The nightmares faded. The constant fear eased. She began to imagine a future that held joy instead of dread, and she fell in love with Jackson. It happened gradually, like the turning of seasons. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he always had time to listen when she needed to talk, the way he worked hard at the freight company, earning James's respect and trust, the way he treated everyone with kindness, from the children to the roughest mule driver. One evening in early autumn, nearly 6 months after their arrival in Denver, Jackson took her to a restaurant for dinner. It was a modest establishment, but to Penelope, it felt impossibly elegant after months of simple meals. "I have something to ask you," Jackson said when the meal was finished. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with his napkin. Penelope's heart began to beat faster. She thought she knew what was coming, but she waited, letting him find his words. "I know I said I would give you time," Jackson said, "and I have meant that. I would wait forever if you needed me to, but I have to know, Penelope. Is there a chance that you might feel for me what I feel for you? Because I love you. I have loved you since that first day I saw you in the general store, and every day since has only made that love grow stronger." "Jackson," Penelope whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I am not asking for an answer tonight," Jackson continued. "I just need you to know that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I want to marry you. Properly, with you choosing freely because it is what you want, not because you are being forced or because you owe me anything." "I do not need more time," Penelope said, reaching across the table to take his hands. "I know my answer. I love you, Jackson Irwin. You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you gave me back my future. You showed me what kindness looks like, what respect looks like. You make me happy. So yes, I will marry you, and gladly." Jackson's face transformed with joy. He came around the table and pulled her to her feet, kissing her there in front of everyone in the restaurant. People applauded, and Penelope laughed against his lips, feeling lighter than air. They were married in November of 1883 in a small church in Denver with James and Emma as witnesses and Mrs. Garrett beaming from the front pew. Penelope wore a simple dress of deep blue that Emma had helped her sew. Jackson wore his best clothes, pressed and clean, his hair slicked back. When the preacher asked if she came to the marriage of her own free will, Penelope's voice rang clear and strong. I do. There was no cruelty here, no coercion, no dread. Just two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and chosen to build a life together. They rented a small house on the outskirts of Denver. Nothing fancy, but it had a garden where Penelope planted vegetables and flowers. Jackson continued working for James, eventually becoming a partner in the freight company as the business grew. Penelope took in sewing to supplement their income and discovered she had a talent for design that soon had other women requesting her services. In the spring of 1884, Penelope received a letter from Valentine. It was from her father, the first communication since her flight. His handwriting was shaky as he wrote that her mother had passed peacefully in February. He said he was sorry for so many things, but especially for trying to force her into a marriage that would have destroyed her. He said he understood if she could not forgive him, but he wanted her to know that he was proud of her courage. Penelope cried when she read the letter, mourning the mother she would never see again, grappling with complicated feelings about her father. Jackson held her and let her grieve. "Do you want to write back to him?" Jackson asked gently. "Someday," Penelope said. "But not yet. The wound is too fresh." The letter also contained news that Marcus Thornhill had remarried, some girl from Kansas who apparently did not know his reputation. Penelope felt a stab of pity for the unknown woman, but mostly she felt relief that Marcus had moved on, that the threat of him coming after them had finally ended. In October of 1884, Penelope gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas after the blacksmith who had helped them. He was a healthy baby with Jackson's gray eyes and Penelope's stubborn chin. Holding him for the first time, Penelope marveled at the fact that this child had been born from love and choice, not duty or coercion. 2 years later, a daughter joined them, whom they named Sarah after the woman who had helped them escape. She was a wild child from the start, always climbing and exploring, making her parents laugh with her fearless spirit. As the years passed, the freight company prospered. Jackson and James expanded operations, adding new routes into the mountains. Penelope's sewing business grew until she had to hire assistants to keep up with demand. They moved to a larger house with room for their growing family. In 1890, they received unexpected visitors. Sarah and Horace, the two who had led Marcus's men on a wild chase years ago, showed up at their door. Sarah was married now to a rancher in Wyoming, and Horace was her foreman. They had come to Denver on business and wanted to see how the young couple they had helped was faring. Penelope and Jackson welcomed them with open arms, insisting they stay for dinner. The children were fascinated by Sarah's stories of adventure, and Horace entertained them with tricks and sleight of hand. "You did well for yourselves," Sarah said approvingly, looking around their comfortable home. "I am glad. I always hoped you would make it. We could not have done it without you," Penelope said. "You would have found a way," Sarah said. "You had the courage to run, and that is the hardest part. Everything else was just logistics." In 1895, Penelope finally wrote to her father. The anger had faded over the years, worn away by happiness and the perspective that came with having her own children. She could not imagine putting her children in the position her father had put her in, but she could understand the desperation that had driven him. George wrote back immediately, his joy at hearing from her evident in every line. They began a tentative correspondence. He had sold the general store and was living quietly in a boarding house, working as a clerk. He asked tentatively if he might visit someday, meet his grandchildren. Penelope discussed it with Jackson, who left the decision entirely to her. In the end, she invited her father to Denver for Christmas. The visit was awkward at first, heavy with unspoken history, but the children bridged the gap. George was a doting grandfather, and Penelope found that forgiveness, when freely given, healed old wounds over the years, Denver grew from a frontier town into a thriving city. Jackson and Penelope grew with it, their business expanding, their family settling deep roots. They had 4 children eventually: Thomas, Sarah, and later twins they named Helen and James after the people who had helped them along the way. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Jackson took Penelope to the finest restaurant in Denver. They were prosperous now, respected members of the community. Their children were healthy and happy. They had built a life beyond anything Penelope had imagined during those dark days before her planned wedding to Marcus. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not come to your window that night?" Jackson asked over dessert. "Every day," Penelope said honestly. "But not with regret. I think about it with gratitude that you were brave enough to offer me a choice." "I was terrified," Jackson admitted. "I thought you would refuse, or worse, that I would get you killed trying to escape. Instead, you gave me my life," Penelope said. She reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand that had helped her out a window into freedom all those years ago. "You gave me everything, Jackson. A home, a family, a future I chose for myself. I love you more today than I did the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Jackson lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I am the luckiest man alive," he said. "I stole away a woman the night before her wedding, and she ended up stealing my heart completely." They laughed together, this couple who had risked everything for freedom and love and found both in abundance. In 1910, they received word that Marcus Thornhill had died, thrown from his horse during a storm. He left behind a widow who wasted no time selling the ranch and moving east. Penelope felt nothing but a distant pity. Marcus seemed like a figure from another life, a threat that had never fully materialized, a fate she had escaped. By 1915, Jackson and Penelope were grandparents. Thomas had married and given them a granddaughter. Sarah had followed her namesake's example and married a cowboy who respected her independent spirit. The twins were both courting, much to their parents' amusement. Jackson's hair had gone silver, and Penelope's honey-colored hair was streaked with white. They moved a little slower now, their bodies showing the wear of long lives lived fully. But when Jackson looked at Penelope, he still saw the brave young woman who had climbed out a window into an uncertain future. And when Penelope looked at Jackson, she still saw the cowboy who had offered her freedom when the whole world said she had none. They sold the freight company to their son Thomas, who had a good head for business, and James's son as a partner. They kept the house, but spent their days in quieter pursuits. Jackson took up woodworking and made toys for the grandchildren. Penelope finally wrote the book she had always dreamed of, a romance set on the frontier that drew heavily from her own experiences. On a warm evening in June of 1918, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. They had been married 35 years. They had built a life, raised children, weathered storms, and celebrated joys. They had grown old together, and there was a sweetness in that which Penelope had never imagined as a frightened 20-year-old fleeing into the night. "You remember the first sunrise after we ran?" Penelope asked, her hand in Jackson's. "I remember everything about those days," Jackson said. "I remember thinking that if we survived, if we made it through, I would spend every day making sure you never regretted trusting me." "I never did," Penelope said simply. "Not once, not even when things were hard, because even in the hardest times I was free. I was choosing my own path. And I was choosing you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned gold and pink and purple. Somewhere inside, they could hear their daughter Sarah visiting with her children, the sound of laughter and conversation drifting through the open windows. "We did all right," Jackson said softly. "Did we not? We did better than all right," Penelope replied. "We built something beautiful. We made a family, a life, a legacy of love instead of fear. That cowboy who stole me away the night before my wedding gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." "What was that?" Jackson asked, though he thought he knew. "Himself," Penelope said. "His courage, his kindness, his heart, and in return I gave him mine freely and completely. That is what love is supposed to be, Jackson, a choice made every day. And I have chosen you every single day since that night, and I will keep choosing you for whatever days we have left." Jackson pulled her close, and they sat together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had defied the odds and built a love story that spanned decades. They had started their journey with nothing but hope and determination, fleeing into an uncertain future. They were ending it with everything that mattered: each other, their family, their memories, and a love that had only deepened with time. The Wild West that had formed the backdrop of their youth had faded into history, replaced by electricity and automobiles and all the trappings of modern civilization. But the lessons learned in those desperate days remained: courage in the face of fear, kindness in the face of cruelty, the absolute necessity of freedom and choice in building a life worth living. In 1925, Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep, Penelope holding his hand. He was 67 years old and had lived to see all his children married and happy, had held great-grandchildren in his arms. Penelope grieved deeply, but she did not regret. They had been given more years together than many couples ever received, and they had used those years well. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by family, telling stories of the old days to grandchildren and great-grandchildren who could barely imagine a world without telephones and motion pictures. She told them about a young cowboy who had been brave enough to offer a trapped woman freedom, and a young woman who had been brave enough to take it. When Penelope Irwin died in 1933 at the age of 70, she was buried next to Jackson in a cemetery overlooking the mountains they had both loved. Their children and grandchildren gathered to remember them, to celebrate a love story that had begun with an escape in the night and had ended with a lifetime of devotion. On Penelope's gravestone, beneath her name and dates, Jackson's grandson carved a simple inscription that she had requested in her will. She chose freedom and found love, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the fear or the flight, not the danger or the desperate days on the run. What mattered was that a young woman had been given a choice when she should have had none, and she had chosen love over duty, freedom over security, hope over despair. And that choice had echoed through the generations, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is to believe that they deserve better, and then to reach for it with both hands. The house that Jackson and Penelope had built stood for many more years, eventually becoming home to Thomas's grandchildren and then their children. The freight company that had been built on the foundation of Jackson's hard work remained a family business well into the 20th century. And the story of the young couple who had fled into the night became family legend, told and retold, a reminder of where they had come from and what their ancestors had dared to risk for love. Because in the end, that is what endures. Not property or position, not fear or force, but love freely given and gratefully received. Jackson and Penelope had understood that truth from the beginning, and they had built their entire lives around it. And in doing so, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own years, a legacy of courage and compassion that shaped everyone who came after them. The Wild West had been a hard land that demanded hard people to survive it. But Jackson and Penelope had proven that even in that harsh landscape, There was room for tenderness, for choice, for the radical act of seeing another person's humanity and honoring it. They had shown that the strongest bonds are forged not through coercion but through freedom, not through ownership but through partnership, not through fear but through love. And so their story became more than just a tale of escape and adventure. It became a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of courage, and the enduring strength of a love built on mutual respect and freely given devotion. It was a reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to choose happiness over duty, to choose freedom over security, to choose love over fear. Their descendants carried those lessons forward into new generations, into new challenges and new times. But the core truth remained the same, that every person deserves the freedom to choose their own path, and that true love can only exist where there is freedom to choose. Jackson and Penelope had lived that truth, and in doing so, they had left a legacy far more valuable than money or land. They had left a legacy of love,